that you'll do so, I've made an example just for you.
Yes. Whoa.
Welcome back. In recent times, I've found that indie horror developers seem to be moving in a direction that exploits the player's technical vulnerability within the genre of horror, specifically within the genre of meta-horror. But this is a consequence of a decades-long tradition with pulling one up on the player who tries to immerse themselves in the world. But why is enhancing a genre of horror like this so impactful and sometimes damaging? The fault can probably be tied all the way back to the gaming legend of Polybus, a game that everyone knows the story of. I would be hard-pressed to find someone who doesn't. Whatever story you ascribe to it, of being a CIA torture machine, a haunted game, or even just a game that gave people seizures, I believe that the concept of a game that hurts the player in some way can be shown with this fantastical urban legend. Back in 1998, Metal Gear Solid read your hard drive on the PlayStation. So, you like Koikatsu Party? You enjoy illusion games? I can see you enjoy having Koikatsu models. You like being risky, don't you? Thanks, Psycho Mantis. No problem, 108. In 2002, Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem tried to trick the player into turning their volume up, and even tried to make the player believe that they had just deleted their save file. The point is, early adopters of the subgenre showed that there was a demand for a kind of game that took player agency away, or even incorporated outside elements in order to make breaking the fourth wall more genuine. People want something that could fulfill a genuine fear of losing progress, or knowledge that characters within the game itself could be reading your inputs outside of the game that you were playing. It's a pretty scary idea for a lot of people. It's an invasion of privacy and feels wrong for a game to be doing to the player. These early adopters led the way for a renaissance of horror that tests the player's trust in the developer's vision. But there comes an issue with the type of horror that results from this. Does the developer put my best interests first as a player? There's a significant level of trust between a player on PC and the person who issues software for them. This isn't found on consoles, which is why the development of these trends became a lot more personal over time. There have been plenty of cases of games that have been considered famous for this issue. Nearly a decade ago, there was a fan game called Sonic Gather Battle that had read the player's inputs on everything they did on their computer in order to act as some kind of DRM. It logged your key input, so if you looked up the name of the game and then cheat at the end of it, it would close the game instantly and then give you a prompt. It essentially acted as malware. Which brings me to the first of the games that I'll be using to show meta-horror. Lose Lose was created in 2009 as a student project. It served as a proof of concept and piece of art that showed the level of trust between the player and the developer. A player's in-game actions could harm their computer. Every enemy in the game was a file that was stored in their Mac OS installation. It was mythologized almost as much as Polybius was, showing the fact that people were interested in things that could have real consequences for the player playing it. But Lose Lose was not a virus. Although it had real consequences for playing, it was not malicious in of itself. Arguably, this is where the genre peaked, but games following Lose Lose had attempted to scale back the consequences of harming a player. After all, you can't really go anywhere but backwards from there unless you divulge the player's personal information as well, but who would really do that, right? The stakes were lowered with many horror games following Lose Lose, even if Lose Lose is not a horror game in of itself. I'm Scared by Ivan Zanatti came out in 2012. It also does take control of your computer, but the ways it does are more like benign growths rather than malignant tumors. Where Lose Lose deleted files, I'm Scared creates files. The game even opens up Google and shows you a YouTube video mid-game. It's kind of crazy how we went backwards in terms of player harm, but in this case it's still very effective. The idea that a game can involuntarily redirect you towards things outside of the game is incredibly uncomforting. You have to solve mazes using text files that the game generates. It's not just novel in what it does to you in horror, it uses it to create unique and memorable puzzles. It forces this on the player multiple times throughout the game. It's strange though,
While it does technically harm the player's computer, it doesn't really feel all that malicious, like some may see something like lose-lose as. You can look at Sad Satan for essentially what people think I'm Scared was like in the early 2010s. Nothing else really comes close. It's hard to know where to go from there when a game like that appears. It's interesting how the scale of these games has shrunk, but the ideas have not really been toned down. If you look at the next decade of meta-horror following I'm Scared in 2012, outside of the main genre, there were still some pretty interesting cases of meta-horror fourth wall breaks in games. OneShot changes your computer's wallpaper and redirects you to find documents on your computer in order to finish certain routes of the game. It's more of a fourth wall break type of situation, but it took what I'm Scared was doing and incorporated it into a more melancholy game. Doki Doki Literature Club fits the meta-horror label much better, considering it has numerous cases of fourth wall breaking and external problems that you need to solve. It's much more of a horror experience than OneShot. This brings us to the main concern I have with meta-horror following a decade of games copying aspects from Lose-Lose and I'm Scared. KinitoPET came out in early 2024, and its gimmick was that it was largely more of a malicious product than any of the other meta-horror games. KinitoPET aimed to copy the idea of having Bonzi Buddy on your computer, an old program that was one of the first things to steal your data so easily by installing a virtual assistant. It was a real threat to people. But when KinitoPET attempts to expose your webcam, take control of your desktop, read your folders, and expose your address, I'm starting to get skeptical of where we're going. I'm not discounting how well crafted this game is, but I feel like this is more shock than intrigue for me. It went viral because of this back in 2024, but it's an interesting case study in how players already feel their information has been exposed so much that they will be completely fine with a game like this, showing them that they have their information so easily stolen. It is scary. But while it's scary, it's the same type of scary as having your address posted online. If this game can connect to the internet or show your address to you as proof it can get it from you, then what's stopping the next dev from going even further? Will the next game read out your browser history? Will the next game start tracking location services on your laptop? Will it start reading out what accounts you have in Google, Firefox, and Brave? You take away control from the player and that's the scare. But these things are not as novel as they once may have been. They've been done to death. It would be more novel if we just went back to basics at this point. With the advent of more and more games having their constructions exposed and code hijacked, it's honestly a little out of touch for devs to be doing this type of interaction still. So what does KinitoPET really mean by showing your address or turning on your webcam? It's not really communicating a gameplay response or challenging a player's beliefs. It's incredibly shock and awe. It only really works in a universe where you aren't already being bombarded by corporations stealing your data. We're entering an age where technology has not advanced to a point where we can stop these attacks before reaching the player. The reality is scarier than what these games are doing. Your personal computer feels more sacred at this moment in time than it ever has in the history of technology. So damaging that feels like a trade-off that just isn't worth it anymore. I think that meta-horror is a very interesting genre, and tons of incredible games have been made, like Pony Island, Inscription, Shipwreck 64, I'm Scared, OneShot. I can keep going, but we'd be here a while. I think people really need to be more selective with these aspects of horror in the end. What will the next major game bring? It's a slippery slope, and while this genre has been producing the only real games that have been worth playing in terms of interesting horror experiences, there's too much here that we as consumers need to be wary of. I don't believe developers should be using players as testing grounds for these concepts, as there's nowhere to go but down from here. We are encroaching on something that as game designers and players, we cannot come back from. So, any questions?